Good morning, boys and girls. I'm Eleanor Hawkins, and welcome to Telestory Time. The Library, a Magic Castle. Come to the Magic Castle when you are growing tall. Rows upon rows of word windows line every single wall. They reach up high as the sky, and you want to open them all. For every time you open one, a new adventure has begun. Yes, the library, a magic castle. And now, boys and girls, I want to congratulate Wes Goforth for his dedication in getting the facts right for 20 years here on WCTI News Channel 12. Wes, from Telestory Time, we wish you many more years here on Channel 12. And now, boys and girls, it's time for me to read our very first story. And the one I've chosen is entitled, Lucinda, the Little Donkey. Mr. Pinckney was a farmer. He had cows and chickens and pigs and Lucinda. Lucinda was a shaggy little donkey. She had sleepy eyes and long ears like other donkeys. She had sharp little hooves like other donkeys, and she was stubborn just like other donkeys. But, said Mr. Pinckney, Lucinda is a very contrary little donkey too. When I want to go to the left, she goes to the right. When I say stop, she pretends she doesn't hear me. And when I put her in her bed in the barn at night, she gets right out again as soon as I am gone. Oh, there's no doubt about it. Lucinda is a contrary, stubborn little donkey. Sure enough, that night, Lucinda waited quietly in her stall until Mr. Pinckney had closed up the barn and gone back to the house. Then she pushed the door open with her nose and trotted down to the meadow where the cows were spending the night. And then Mr. Pinckney found her in the morning, quietly eating clover and pretending that she was a cow. Mr. Pinckney scolded Lucinda all the way back to the barn. But Lucinda just twitched her left ear a little. She just didn't care. When the day's work was over and night was coming on, Mr. Pinckney very carefully put Lucinda in the barn again. And to make sure that she stayed there, he put a rope around her neck and tied it to the stall. Lucinda just opened her sleepy eyes a little wider and waited until Mr. Pinckney was gone. Then she braced her hoofs and pulled and tugged and broke the rope. Out of the barn door she trotted. Mr. Pinckney looked and looked the next morning and finally found her in the pigsty. She was eating corn and rolling in the mud, pretending she was a pig. Mr. Pinckney was so provoked, he had to get out the hose and a big cake of soap and give Lucinda a bath. Now that night he was determined Lucinda should stay in her own bed. He put a new rope around her neck and tied it to her stall. Then he closed the gate to the stall and tied it with a cord. And last of all, he put a big shiny padlock on the barn door. Lucinda watched all the busy doings of Mr. Pinckney out of the corner of her eye. And when she heard him go away, she braced her hoofs and pulled and tugged until she broke the new rope that was around her neck. Then she undid the knot on the cord that fastened the stall gate. Now, Lucinda was a very clever donkey, but there was the big shiny padlock on the barn door. Lucinda twitched her ears. She blinked her sleepy eyes. Then she turned her back to the door and kicked with both her sharp little hoofs, crash, bang. And the padlock was broken and the barn door stood open. Lucinda trotted out, and this time she turned toward the road. Now, Mr. Pinckney heard the crash when Lucinda broke the lock on the barn door. Oh, my goodness, that contrary little donkey is at it again, sighed Mr. Pinckney, and grabbing up his lantern, he started out to find her. He looked here and there and everywhere, but no Lucinda to be found. Mr. Pinckney even looked in the duck pond and in the dog's house, but Lucinda wasn't there either. It started to rain and then to pour. Poor Mr. Pinckney didn't have his raincoat or his rubbers or his umbrella. He got wet and was very unhappy. Mr. Pinckney was plodding down the road to town, still looking for Lucinda, when he met his neighbors, Mr. Brown and Mr. Hutch, running as fast as they could. "Hurry, hurry, hurry," puffed Mr. Brown. "Little Muddy Creek is overflowing." "Run, run, run," cried Mr. Hutch. "The railroad bridge has washed away." "And the express train, number 49, is due any minute," cried Mr. Brown and Mr. Hutch. Mr. Pinckney started to run too, to warn number 49 that the bridge was down. All this time, Lucinda had been standing quietly under a tree by the railroad tracks. She was beginning to feel very wet and uncomfortable. "Surely Mr. Pinckney will come fussing along soon and take me home to my nice warm stable," thought Lucinda. "Whoo, whoo," went the whistle off in the distance. Lucinda twitched her ears. "Maybe that's Mr. Pinckney whistling for me," she thought. Whoo, whoo, whoo. The whistle was big and loud now, and Lucinda could see a bright light. It was train number 49, but Lucinda didn't know that. "Well, Mr. Pinckney certainly has improved his whistling. Oh, how loud it is, and what a bright lantern he is carrying," said Lucinda to herself. "I might as well take one step forward so he can be sure to see me." And she stepped right on the tracks. Whee went the brakes on number 49. Whoo, whoo went the whistle as the engineer stopped the train. "What is a donkey doing on the railroad tracks?" cried the engineer and the fireman and the conductor and even the porter. Just then Mr. Pinckney, Mr. Brown, and Mr. Hutch came running up. "Lucinda is the bravest, smartest donkey there ever was. She has saved number 49 from falling into the creek," cried Mr. Brown. "Lucinda is a heroine," cried Mr. Hutch. "She should have a medal." Mr. Pinckney didn't say anything. He just rubbed his head and looked at Lucinda. And then Lucinda twitched her long ears and looked out of the corners of her sleepy eyes at Mr. Pinckney. And then she let Mr. Pinckney take her home to the barn. All the train people and Mr. Brown and Mr. Hutch bought a beautiful silver medal for Lucinda to wear around her neck. And Mr. Pinckney said she could sleep anywhere she wanted. But do you know what? That contrary, stubborn little donkey never went out of the barn at night again. And that, boys and girls, is the story, Lucinda, the Little Donkey. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back to read in our big new notebook in just a moment. And now from our big Do You Know book, do you know all about the month of February? Do you know the flower for February is the violet? Do you know the birthstone for February is the amethyst? Do you know Charles Lindbergh was born on February the 4th, 1902 in Detroit, Michigan? Lindbergh is remembered for his first nonstop solo flight across the Atlantic from New York to Paris in May 1927. Do you know Laura Ingalls Wilder was born on February the 7th, 1867? She wrote the popular Little House on the Prairie stories based on her own life growing up on the American frontier in the late 1800s, and they've been very popular even on TV. Do you know John Glenn made history on February the 20th, 1962 by orbiting the Earth, and he became the first astronaut to accomplish this feat aboard Friendship 7. Do you know the famous poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was born on February the 27th, 1807. He wrote Paul Revere's Bride. We're all familiar with Listen to My Children, and You Shall Hear the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Do you know February the 2nd is Groundhog Day? According to a German legend, the groundhog is said to come out of hibernation on this day. If he sees his shadow, because the day is sunny, he will return to its burrow in the ground for another 6 weeks of sleep. If he does not see his shadow because of an overcast, then he will stay out of his burrow, and winter will be shorter and spring will arrive early. That is the old legend. Now, boys and girls, let me remind you, be sure and visit your library sometime during this next week. Any of the libraries in the Craven, Pamlico, Carteret Regional Library System. And be sure to check out a very good book on your very own library card. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back with another story in just a moment. And now, boys and girls, I'm going to read you the story, What Happened to Piggy. Mr. and Mrs. Pig lived in a shabby, broken-down house. They had one little pig. They called him Piggy. Yes, Piggy Pig. That was his whole name. The pigs did not fix up their house. They did not mend or paint it. They were very careless. Inside the house, they did not pick up things and put them away. Everything was messy and mussy. so of course they could not find things. Mr. Pig would ask, "Where is my hat?" and it would not be hanging on the nail where it belonged. Mrs. Pig would say, "Have you looked under the bed or on the coffee pot?" When Mrs. Pig could not find her shoes, Mr. Pig would say, "Maybe they are in the bathtub." Mr. and Mrs. Pig were always late too, late wherever they went, and late when people came to the house. When the milkman came to collect the empty bottles, they would not be ready. Mrs. Pig would have to rinse them out in a hurry. When Monday morning came and the man shouted laundry, the bundle would not be ready either. Mrs. Pig would have to rush around. Sometimes Mr. and Mrs. Pig even had to ask, "Where's Piggy?" Once he was even carried away in the vegetable man's cart in a basket of onions before they noticed. They had to chase him away down the road. He was a cute little pig. He would have been nice if he had been nicely taken care of. But he had never been taught to wash his own face or pick up his toys. His swing in the garden was broken down too, just like the house. Now, when friends came to see the pigs, they did not care to stay long, for when they tried to walk across the floor, they would trip over books and toys. When they found chairs, they would sit down on clothes and dishes and nuts. So they would say very soon, "Well, we must be going," and they were glad enough to get away too. Now, one Monday morning, Mrs. Pig heard footsteps on the porch. "Laundry," shouted the man. "In a minute," she shouted back. And then she snatched the soiled towels from the bathroom floor. Then in a big hurry, she stuffed them into the laundry bag, and then she gave it to the man. When he had gone, Mr. Pig said, "Let's go to market and buy a nice red cabbage." "All right, help me find the market basket. It wasn't in the sink or on the garbage can." They finally found it in the potato bin. Then Mrs. Pig asked, "Where's Piggy?" "Well, now he's probably in the garden trying to swing." But he wasn't. "Isn't he on the porch playing with the corn cobs?" No, he wasn't. "Well, where is he?" asked Mr. Pig. "Come to think of it, I don't believe he has had his breakfast. Here is your cereal bowl and mine, but Piggy's little one is missing." "Then he's still in bed. I'll go wake him up." Mrs. Pig came back from Piggy's bedroom. She looked very frightened and very pale pink. She said, "He's not there." "What? He isn't sleeping cozily under his own blanket?" "No, the blanket is there, but that's all. So I must have bundled Piggy up with the sheets and sent him to the laundry." Mr. Pig looked alarmed. "Well," he said, "we had better rush to the laundry quick before they send him down the chute into the tub of very hot water." They ran down the road to the village. The man in the laundry office was very surprised when they came rushing in. "We want our sheets back, quick. Our child Piggy is in them." "I'm afraid it's too late," said the man. "They have already gone down the chute." Mr. and Mrs. Pig jumped right into the chute themselves. It was dark and slippery in there. They slid along fast. Then they came whizzing out in the room below. "We want our sheets back. Our child Piggy is in them." The pigs working there were astonished to see Mr. and Mrs. Pig. "But your bundle has already gone to the washing room." Mr. and Mrs. Pig were still whizzing along the floor as they entered the washing room. It was full of hot steam and smelled of soap and wetness. Mr. Pig shouted, "Don't put any more sheets into the tub. Stop, stop, quick." Just then, there was a loud squeal from a bundle in the corner. Mr. and Mrs. Pig rushed over there. They shook the sheets, and Piggy tumbled out. "Where am I?" he asked. "Why was cloth all over my nose?" They hurried him home. They didn't stop to talk. Mrs. Pig wiped Piggy off and gave him a good hot breakfast. Then she said to Mr. Pig, "I think this has taught us a lesson. This time we almost lost Piggy. It would be better if we kept things in order. Our house would look prettier too." So they began to be more careful. It took quite a while to learn because they had a bad habit. And as Mr. Pig said, bad habits are hard to break. They are like tough weeds. You have to keep chewing at them. But they did keep trying, and after a while, when Mr. Pig wanted his hat, it would be right on the peg where it belonged. When Mrs. Pig wanted her market basket, it would be in its own place in the kitchen cupboard. Then their friends liked to come and see the pigs in their cheerful, neat little house. If anyone asked, "Where's Piggy?" he would be somewhere around, playing on the porch or swinging in his safe, neatly mended swing, and not lost in the laundry with cloth all over his nose. And that, boys and girls, is a story of what happened to Piggy. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back with more stories in just a moment. And we just celebrated Groundhog Day this week, but I want to read you this poem, Fun on Groundhog Day. There are shadows you make in the sunshine. There are shadows you make by the lamp. There are shadows that lurk in the forest while you tell creepy stories at camp. There are shadows that help you with puppets and shadows you make just for play. But the shadows that's famous is Groundhog's, when he tells whether winners will stay. Let's go out on every groundhog morning and watch for his shadow, my son. It may not be at all scientific, but you've got to admit that it is fun. Fun on Groundhog Day. And now, boys and girls, I want to, for a few minutes, to talk to you about something very important. I know that you hear me say many times, reading can be fun. And yet, how often do we hear folks say, "I've just got no time to read a book." And then somebody else will say, "Life's just too short to read books." Whereas, in fact, if you read only 15 minutes a day, you would read 1/2 a book a week, 2 books a month, and 20 books a year. And 1,000 books in your lifetime. Now that is equal to going through college 5 times, making you a world authority on any subject that you really choose, or even taking a trip all the way around the world. And how do you find time, 15 minutes a day? Well, just think of the time that you wait on people. And just think of the times that you have time and you don't know what to do. And then sometimes you're waiting for your favorite television show. And you know, you can have a book there ready to continue reading. And you know, another thing I want to remind you, boys and girls, that at nighttime when you're having your bedtime story hour, take time and ask your parents if you can read to them. And then you've enjoyed that, and then just before you turn out the light, you might read another 15 minutes or more in a very good book that you're enjoying. So think about these things. And two, they'll help you, they'll entertain you, they'll make you feel good. And you know they are always there when you want them. And you know we always talk about, yes, reading can be fun. And I have this little book here that I brought along, and it's entitled The Library. I'd like to go to the library. Well, my pages are sticking together again. I'd like books about spaceships. I'd like books about dinosaurs. I like books about monsters, and I like books about dogs and cats. You know, I love to read. And you know, boys and girls, I have this poetry book that I'd like to read you. Give me a book and long tall grass, and then I will look as the hours pass to other places I can see, to other faces strange to me. In black and white they fill my head with men and women vanished dead. I hope and fear, I wish and need the world stands still, a breathless reed. And in their history I see the untold story of me. And on over here in my books, I like a story of ghosts on gusty nights, wild island ponies galloping with manes that wave their kites. A book that knows the lowdown on what to feed giraffes. A book of nutty nonsense that's nothing much, just laughs. A book to read to find out how basketball stars shoot. Why dinosaurs all died out. What do computers compute? What sail-a-mizen sail is, can Martians really be? How heavy a blue whale is, weighed side by me. A book to curl in bed, to browse in by a brook. Anytime, any place, I'd like any book. And so until next week, this is Eleanor Hawkins saying bye-bye for Telestory Time.